let alone an amendment to our Constitution.
The question is the House to now adjourn. I give the call to the honourable member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. I've spoken in this place on numerous occasions about the risks to Australia posed by investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms. ISDS clauses in trade and investment agreements allow companies to sue governments through a mechanism that I've described as dodgy, and it is dodgy in the well-established Australian meaning of the term because it's inconsistent, lacks transparency, and in many instances it displays a range of other judicial shortcomings, as many expert commentators have found. Indeed, both the UN, the EU and a significant number of individual nations have acknowledged some of these problems or concerns. It's one of the reasons that the United Nations Convention on Transparency and Treaty-Based Investor-State Arbitration came into being in 2014, and it's why in 2018 the Court of Justice of the European Union held that ISDS provisions in investment treaties between EU member states are incompatible with EU law. Speaker, the Australian community has good reason to be wary of ISDS mechanisms because they are unnecessary and they're dangerous. They allow multinational companies to challenge the legitimate laws and policy of sovereign nations. They allow companies to essentially reject laws that might protect the environment or public health or the rights of workers, and sometimes to receive hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. Here in Australia, we've had direct experience of a tobacco company, Philip Morris, using an ISDS clause to attack our plain packaging reforms, which of course were a key part of reducing the awful health impacts and the massive health costs of smoking. It's been estimated that fighting that case cost the Australian taxpayer $40 million and was only won on a jurisdictional issue. Otherwise, plain packaging may well have been effectively blocked by a tobacco company that wanted to maintain its sales and profits from a product that causes death when used as the manufacturer intends. Right now, Australia is subject to another ISDS claim, this time courtesy of one of Clive Palmer's companies, with a claim upon the Australian taxpayer of $300 billion. Speaker, when I spoke about that issue back in March, I was a bit surprised when United Australia Party Senator Ralph Babbitt got up in the other place to express concern that I would have the temerity to describe ISDS mechanisms as being dodgy. I have to say that's an odd hypersensitivity from a fellow who, in his first speech, said, and I quote, "For strength of self-determination and the love of country, we must not allow unelected, undemocratic and unaccountable international groups of organisations to exert undue influence over the future of Australia. We must be the masters of our own destiny." And Speaker, in my view, that's an excellent argument against ISDS mechanisms right there. But after the defence of ISDS from Senator Babbitt, whose party was formerly known as Clive Palmer's United Australia Party, I was even more surprised when I received a letter from Mr Palmer himself, and in that letter Mr Palmer suggested I withdraw my comments and apologise, and he highly recommended that I make no further comment in future. Now, Speaker, whatever you think about Clive Palmer, most people wouldn't think of him as a bloke who generally favours keeping quiet or thinks people should keep their thoughts to themselves, especially when they're in a role as a parliamentary representative, as Clive Palmer himself once was. But in any case, Speaker, I can assure you I'm not going to be silent just because it suits Clive Palmer. Mr Palmer is free to pursue his interests, and I'm free to express my views. And indeed, I have a duty as a member of this place, as we all do, to speak up in the national interest. In the past, I've done that when Mr Palmer sought to undermine WA's nation-leading and I dare say world-leading management of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in WA, we remember that Mr Palmer did that with the shameful assistance of the Morrison government. And I'll continue to speak up in relation to the risks posed by the unnecessary and dangerous ISDS system. Let me be clear that I've not made the argument about the ISDS system, which I've done on many occasions, by reflecting on any particular tribunal, its members or process. My criticism is of the system as a whole. Speaker, there's no reason for large multinational companies to be able to sue governments through an outside tribunal system when they can either make use of a country's judicial system in the normal way or make use of government-to-government dispute resolution processes that all trade and investment treaties include. As long as Australia is party to agreements that contain ISDS clauses, and as long as we don't act to exclude their operation, we will be at risk of the kinds of enormously harmful outcome that was involved in the Philip Morris action all those years ago, and is at risk from the action being taken by Mr Palmer's Singapore-based company now?
The question is the House to now adjourn and give the call to the honourable member for Forrest.
Thank you, Speaker.